Hello everyone and welcome back to Oba's Trending Gist. Today we are diving deep into the recent pronouncements from a man whose words always carry weight in Nigerians' economic discourse. The former central bank governor, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi. He has spoken extensively on the removal of fuel subsidy, the government's borrowing habits, and he's offered a surprisingly nuanced, almost contradictory take on the current Tinubu's administration. Is it commendation or criticism? Let's take a closer look at his powerful insight and unpack what they truly mean for Nigeria. Sit back and take a watch.
Your Highness, I remember in those days when you were the CBN governor, we know all the conversation that you had about this same issue, and the fact that what is required was the leadership to take the right action. And like Mr. Atadokita said just now, not just the one-day action, but the policies and processes that follow, making sure they are executed. In fact, I remember there was a specific time that you said you've done your best with monetary policy and that's your job as the CBN governor. The rest of it is left in the hands of those who were politicians. And I think that was part of the reason you said you got a query from the SGF. So you got a query at that point and it led to so many other things. But let me ask you, sir. Now, in terms of those in power in Nigeria listening, several Nigerians commended the position of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he appointed both Mr. Wale Edun and Mr. Yemi Cardoso. They said these are some of the best brains and best minds, and yet we're in a situation where people are crying. Is it that Nigerians, and I would refer to even the time of President Jonathan, some of the best brains, including the likes of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, including the likes of even my dear sister and friend here, Aruma Ote, were in government and working for government agencies? Is it that the people at the helm of leadership in Nigeria just consistently don't listen to advice and fail to do the right thing beyond the one single action that Mr. Atadopita described as 24-hour decision?
Thank you very much, Kaide. Well, first of all, let me say that it's extremely important for us to try to understand economics and how the economy works. And a failure to understand economics sometimes leads to misplaced expectations. There's a role for the central bank. There's a role for the Ministry of Finance. You've got monetary policy, you have fiscal policy, you have structural policies, you have institutional reforms. And yes, I was one of those who commended the appointment of Wale Edun and Yemi Cardoso. These are two gentlemen that I've known for many years, and I have never had any question about their competence. And if you try to assess them, you've got to ask, what were they supposed to achieve? Okay. Now, going back to the beginning, you talked about 2012. And you talk about the suffering from removal of subsidy. It's simple arithmetic. If you're paying 80 naira or 65 naira per liter, and you begin to pay 160 naira per liter, costs will go up. There will be hardship. And the duty of leaders is to understand that there will be a cost to removing subsidy. And I said in 2012, if you remember from the town hall meeting, to say that there will be hardship is not an economic argument. To say that there will be a cost to removing subsidy is not an economic argument. The economic argument is, this is the cost of removing the subsidy. What is the cost of not removing the subsidy? Are you making a choice? We were in a situation where we had a hedge that we called, it was not a subsidy, it was a hedge. You see, a subsidy by definition, the government says, I will pay X% of the price. That is a subsidy. I'll pay 20% of the price, whatever it is. Price goes up, you pay more, I pay more. Price goes down, you pay less, I pay less. What we had in this country is what in risk management you call a naked hedge, the worst possible derivative you can have. The government said to Nigerians, 200 million Nigerians, you will not pay more than X amount per liter on petrol, no matter what the price of petrol is. So oil price goes up from $40 to $140, the federal government pays the difference. Exchange rate moves from 155 to 300, the government pays the difference. Interest rates move from 5% to 15%, the government pays it. Remember, the price of petrol and what the calculations include the cost of crude, the cost of refined product, the cost of transportation, even interest rates, demurrage. If you look at the template, all of those amounts were being absorbed. The federal government was saying, I have an unlimited pocket. So we moved from a point where we were using revenues to pay subsidy to where we had to borrow money to pay subsidy, to where we had to borrow money to pay interest on the borrowed money. We had become bankrupt. Anyone who takes a naked hedge ends up being bankrupted, especially with a commodity where you don't control the price. So this was the point in 2012. Now, if Nigerians had allowed the Jonathan government to remove the subsidy in 2011, that would have been pain. But that pain would have been a very, very tiny fraction of what we are facing today. This is the cost of delay. At that time, we worked out the numbers in the central bank, and I stood up and put my credibility on the line and said, remove the subsidy today, inflation moves up from 11% to 13%. I will bring it down in a year. We will not have had 30-something% inflation. Okay? That was where we were. Now, people like my friend Kaide Fayemi here and his APC friends had occupied Nigeria, came out on the streets, told us we could not do it. And I remember calling one of my friends. And this is, we should talk about these things because it's important. There's a kind of poetic justice. That it is actually the people who led the Occupy Nigeria movement who ended up seeing the problem, inheriting the problem, and having to do it. And I remember calling one of my friends at that time and saying, look, one of my closest friends, saying, you know that what we're doing is right. He said, yes, I know. I said, why? He said, well, I'm in opposition. My job is to make the government look bad. You know, you are the governor of central bank, you go and defend your government. Just politics. And you know, the only reason the government compromised at that time, maybe we should know this, the only reason the government compromised and did 50% to 100% was Boko Haram. Because there were thousands of Nigerians on the streets in Lagos and Kano and Kaduna and all that. At the time when we had suicide bombers in the country. And there was a fear. If one day one of these suicide bombers goes to these Nigerians and explodes the bomb and you have 200 corpses, it will no longer be about subsidy. So you have to give President Jonathan the credit. He was determined to do it, but at the end of the day, the compromise was made, okay, to save Nigerian lives. Now, what has the central bank achieved? Central bank's role is to provide stability. The central bank does not deliver growth. It does not deliver employment. It provides an environment that is conducive to growth. Okay? Now, and the central bank has achieved it. You don't want inflation moving from 10% to 15% to 20% to 25% because, as I said a few weeks ago at NESG, Nigerians don't realize that we were on the brink of hyperinflation. Beyond a certain rate of inflation, it becomes runaway inflation. You can't control it. You'd buy rice in the morning. By the time you come at 12 noon, the price has changed. By 4 p.m., it has changed. This is what happened in Zimbabwe. It happened in Venezuela. It happened in Argentina. We were heading for Nigeria. We were printing money like that. So we're heading for Nigeria. We're heading in the direction of Zimbabwe under Mugabe or Uganda under Idi Amin. So inflation has been reined in. The runaway devaluation has been stopped. Yes, we're at 1,400. Nobody wants an naira at 1,400. But it's better to know that it will be 1,400 for the next 6 months, 8 months, 10 years, than to think it's 1,400 today, 2,000 tomorrow, 2,500, which is really... So the central bank's job is not to give you a strong naira. The central bank's job is not to give you low prices. The central bank's job is to reduce the volatility in the price level. And so when you assess the central bank, you've got to say, what has it done? Have you reduced volatility inflation? Have you brought it down? We're going to bring it down to single digit. You're on your way. There's still a long way to go. Okay, I would like to see inflation come down to under 10%. It will take time. But in terms of stopping it from running away, it has. Exchange rate volatility has been reduced. Now, on the fiscal side, and we talk about tax reforms, those reforms, the Tax Act only takes off next year. So we must remember that before the tax reforms have kicked in, we have increased government revenues. We have brought down debt service ratios from 100 and something percent to about 40%. Okay, so on the revenue side, you've got to give the finance ministry credit for what it's done. Now, is there more to do? Yes. And the way where the problem is what Atedo has mentioned, is the expenditure side.
Yes.
Okay, the quality of spending. And some of these things, we've got to be honest with ourselves. Look, why do we need 48 ministers? Why do we need dozens of vehicles when we're moving around in convoys or traveling all over the country?
So, Your Highness, that brings me to that question which I'm asking, which is, do we have an affliction that affects the hearing of our leaders and unable to listen to the good advice?
No, I mean...
If we have an affliction, we'll get a doctor to fix it.
Yes, so your question started with the finance minister and central bank governor, and we're saying that there are things that are beyond them when you're dealing with the economy. So I would go along with that and say you've got to look at overheads. You've got to look at things like your contract processing, procurement process, okay? There's still questions about inflated contracts. There are questions about transparency. There are questions, all this money is coming into the federal, and this at federal, state, and local level, there are serious questions about how the money that is being raised is being used. And the arithmetic is simple. If you stop paying subsidy, why are we still borrowing more? Because if you've filled a hole, we should have the revenue to fund expenditure. But we fill in one hole and dig in a bigger hole. So this government needs to look at institutions. It needs to look at the quality of spending. It needs to understand that if you keep making more money and keep blowing it away, you're going to undo what you have done. But apart from that, I think a lot of good has been done, okay? But we still have to look at what needs to
Okay, I would ask this question, Your Royal Highness, one more time. And I hope I get a straight answer to it. Nigerian leaders, from as long as I can remember since I've been in this country, they seem to not be listening to wise counsel. Even the man that you said was President Jonathan at the time had the good counsel to say, no matter what happens with Boko Haram and the rest of them, this is wise counsel, not just from the then SLS governor of CBN, from a great mind like Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Everybody said this is the right thing. In fact, I remember you mentioned on Channels Television, where I was the GM then, that we're on the precipice, about to fall. You said it. So why will that president not take the right action? And then the one after, and now the one that is there now, knowing what the answers are from the experts, the likes of Wale and the likes of Yemi Cardoso and all the other brilliant minds that are working with him. Why are they not doing it?
Look, in fairness,
affliction or what? I asked the question one more time because we have to move on.
On this question, in fairness to Jonathan, he took the right decision. And look, I'm not a fan of Jonathan. He suspended me from my job, okay? So okay? But you have to commend him, okay? President Jonathan took the advice and agreed to remove subsidy. As a government, we all agreed to remove the subsidy, and we're determined to remove the subsidy. The only reason we stopped at 50%, like I said, was the threat to people's lives. Now, but to your question, why do Nigerian leaders not listen? What my experience, okay, with talking to many of the leaders is they listen to so many people and they decide that they're going to accept those that tell them what they want to hear. We have too many sycophants in government. Look, you need to say, when I got to, you sit in a meeting and the president is there and people are speaking and the first thing they say is, Mr. President, I would like to thank you for your leadership to this country. In fact, you know, God has blessed Nigeria by making us your leader. If you were not there, I don't know where we would be. By the time these people lay this foundation, it is their advice that the president takes. Okay? People like me who would say, Mr. President, there are some things that are wrong. When you leave, they say you are his enemy. Okay? So the problem is that when leaders allow themselves to be surrounded by praise singers and by sycophants, they never get good advice. So people like Atedo and myself are always enemies of state because people don't like hearing the bad news. There was nothing we didn't say to Buhari about printing money, about ways and means, about the exchange rate, about subsidy. But every time you spoke about the economy, it was seen as a personal attack against the president. And there are people around him who convinced him that this person is your enemy. That's why he's saying this. Okay. So we need to begin to ask as leaders, who do we surround ourselves with? And please, those who are ministers and those who speak to the president, it is not to your benefit to turn yourselves, you disgrace yourselves, you debase yourselves by turning yourselves into praise singers.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Ernest.
That was quite a session, with His Royal Highness Sanusi Lamido Sanusi truly laid out the economic realities facing Nigeria, pulling no punches while also acknowledging some efforts. Now, let us break down some of his key points and what they imply. First of all, Sanusi stressed the crucial need to understand basic economics. He pointed out that a failure to grasp how an economic truly works often leads to misplaced expectations amongst the populace. He clearly distinguished between the role of central bank, which should provide stability, and the Ministry of Finance, which handles fiscal policy. He also emphasized the importance of structural reform and the institutional changes, not just one-off action. Now, on the fuel subsidy removal, he made a compelling argument. He called the previous subsidy regime a naked hedge, essentially explaining it as a situation where the government promised Nigerians a fixed price for petrol, regardless of global oil prices or exchange rates. This meant the government essentially had an unlimited pocket to cover the difference. He argued that while the removal created hardship, the cost of not removing it continues to borrow just to pay for subsidies, and even the interest of those borrowed funds was leading Nigeria towards bankruptcy, mirroring situations in countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. He even made a controversial link to the Jonathan administration, suggesting that the government at the time knew subsidy removal was necessary but compromised due to the threats of Boko Haram, and that this delay only worsened the economic pain we face today. And for the current Tinubu government, Sanusi actually commended them for some difficult decisions like stopping the runaway devaluation and bringing a degree of stability back to the exchange rate. He also acknowledged efforts in tax reform, though he noted their full impact won't be felt until next year. But, and here is the critical part, he questioned why Nigeria is still borrowing heavily despite the massive savings from subsidy removal. He graphically puts it, we are filling one hole and digging a bigger hole. This brings us to what Sanusi sees as the fundamental issue, the quality of government spending and the pervasive influence of sycophants around leaders who tell them what they want to hear rather than the hard truth. This, he argues, is why good counsel often goes unheeded, and leaders make decisions that are politically convenient but economically disastrous. So, What's my critical take on all of this? Lamido Sanusi's analysis, while sharp and at times provocative, highlights a deeply rooted problem in Nigerian governance and economic management. His points aren't just criticism, they are a call for genuine systematic reform. He's essentially saying, yes, President Tinubu made some brave, necessary monetary decisions that I have been advocating for, like floating the naira and removing subsidies. That's the commendation. But the criticism lies in the continuation of fiscal indiscipline and the lack of transparency in how the newfound revenues are being managed. If we are no longer paying billions in subsidy, why is the borrowing continuing at such an alarming rate? This points to an endemic issue of leakages, inflated contracts, and a deep-seated lack of accountability that transcends individuals' administration. Sanusi's lament about leaders being surrounded by praise singers is perhaps his most powerful and depressing observation. It suggests that even with brilliant minds and clear economic blueprints, if the political will is clouded by self-preservation and a desire for popularity, true progress will remain elusive. It's not just about having the right policies, it's about having leaders brave enough to implement them consistently and mature enough to accept honest, often uncomfortable advice. Until Nigeria addresses this fundamental issue of governance, ensuring transparency, accountability, and a genuine commitment to evidence-based decision-making over political expediency, we might continue to see the same economic challenges resurface. Regardless of who is in power, we need leaders who understand the true measure of their success isn't just about initiating reforms, but about the quality and impact of sustained implementation. What do you think? Is Sanusi right about the affliction of our leaders? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button for more trending gist and incisive analysis. This is Oba signing off. See you next time.